I had a marriage that ended because I just honestly, I was terrified of who I would be without my career. I just was like, I'm not worth anything. And, as much as I'd like to admit that I just, oh, I fixed that, Priya, that's something that I have to continually address within myself, is that there's this equation that is really deep down in there, that it's about, your worth equals production. And I see that in the clients I work with. I see that in myself still. And I just remember thinking, wow, if my wife at the time was saying, you have to choose me in this relationship or your work. And I remember looking at her being like, how can you ask me to make that decision? Like, there'll be no me then.
Welcome to Unmute with Priya, the podcast where silence ends, voices rise, and women rediscover the freedom to speak and live authentically, especially in life after 40. This show is proudly sponsored by Project Icon. I'm your host, Priya Sudarsanam. Let's dive into today's conversation.
And I didn't ask you this, but is there something that you want me to make sure that I cover? Like, because usually I'll put a note in front of me and say, make sure you ask about this. Or
Um, you're gonna cover it. You just
okay,
say it with the leading questions, really it.
okay,
Yeah.
all right, let's go. My guest today is Ryan Watts. He's a leadership coach, speaker, and podcast host who helps people reconnect with themselves when success no longer feels honest. Ryan helps people quiet the noise, gain clarity, and make choices that feel true to who they are. Welcome to the show, Ryan. I'm happy to have you as a guest today.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here with you, Priya.
Yeah, and one thing that I really enjoy that's happening more, like initially when I started this podcast, it was about women finding their voice at midlife because I'm a woman and navigating all the transitions that happen, and it's resonating more with a lot of males in the space, and it's not just limited. Finding your voice and finding that part of you that's been locked up is not just limited. It's not gender specific. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I know, I appreciate you said that, and it's funny, I'll just share my experience right now because you just did that wonderful introduction. Thank you for that. And it's funny how you said he's a leadership coach, and I still felt myself do the shrinking thing. And I think I've been involved with coaching for a few years now, and I kept the leadership part out of it. And I was working with my friend who is a marketing agency. Make a long story short, we spent hours trying to figure out, it's difficult to discuss what a coach is. Is it therapy? Is it, and all these things. And one of the things that showed up in there is that I have always been in a leadership position, but there's always been something that's been difficult about calling myself a leader. It makes me, and so part of this is me doing the work that I'm talking about all the time. Is that it is about leadership. It's about self-leadership, but also, leadership as well. So that was just present for me, Priya.
Amazing. No, I'm so excited that we get to have these real conversations. Just because this is what this channel is about. And we talked about like we don't want scripted. We want to have a free flowing conversation because then that gives other people permission. Somebody who's listening to this might be that leader and they've been shrinking and they cringe when they hear those words. I think I've done the same thing. And you're giving permission to the fact that it's okay to actually embody that version of ourself that's already always been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really that's what this work is all about, is that, because there's a response that I could have to that where I sort of get performative and I sort of, get, you know, here's the peacock analogy, I show my feathers or whatnot, but that's also not authentic, and so it's like, share what you this is what part of what you have to offer is called to most people, and it's okay to call it leadership. So I'll just settle into that.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, one of the things we always talk about on or often on Unmute with Priya is that people don't lose their voice overnight. This is not just something that happens overnight. It usually happens little by little. m- Maybe tracing back to childhood or as they start living according to other people's expectations instead of their own. In your experience, What are some of the first signs that someone has become disconnected from themselves?
Oh, well, I think, first of all, it's part of we have agreements with ourselves. And what I mean by that is, whether we realize it or not, we have a general idea of what we value. And what happens is that that's always changing. Sometimes it's daily. We tend to sort of hover eventually in a certain region, but what happens is those agreements change over time. And I think, you might have one agreement like I'm going to be a corporate leader, and what happens is you change, but the agreement doesn't. And so part of it is resetting that agreement with yourself. And what does that look like? That is really the heart of the work here, because what that shows up like is you're still successful, but you're like, I'm far more tired than I used to be.
Yeah.
So, the number one sign, Priya, that I when I work with my clients is that it's like momentum requires, excuse my voice, momentum requires force, and they feel exhausted for with doing things that didn't always cause fatigue. So the cost really is fatigue and feeling like, oh, something's wrong here. I'm still successful, so it's not falling apart, but the agreement with myself has shifted somewhere.
Yeah. I love that you're bringing up the word successful. Um, because on the surface, many people look successful. Everything looks great, but they still feel unfulfilled. Why do you think that happens?
Well, I'll speak from my experience first
Yeah.
because I got to this point where I was 38, 39 years old, in midlife here. And I'm like, wait a second here. I'm kind of looking at the world, not speaking to anybody in particular. And I'm just saying, I did all the things on the checklist. So, like, where's my prize? I don't know what I thought was going to happen. It just was like, where's the parade? What? It's like,
Right.
"Look now." And I don't know if I would know this at the time. I just realized that in order to complete this checklist that I was given, sort of inherited beliefs and, what you sort of was validated outside of you, you lose track of yourself, right? Those agreements, like you keep forcing agreement on yourself until it's like, wait, what? And then everybody's looking at you like, why'd you do it? And it's like, uh, I thought that's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
You kind of rationalize it as responsibility or whatever, but you sort of have you've outsourced your purpose in a way to something else. And I think at midlife there is, you're able to sort of, at least for me, I'm able to regulate my emotions a little bit better and look and say, what is it that I really want to do? And I started working with a coach, and one of the most beautiful things that he gave me was this sort of this analogy between force and space. And I never put those 2 on a continuum before, but when you talk about moving through the world, we think of force, like we're blazing our path. We're gonna, and there's an opposite of that where you just kind of create space and see what shows up there. And that's where we don't spend time there. And there was so much that I realized I didn't know and had disconnected from myself. And I don't remember what your question was really, Priya, at this.
No, it's a great answer, but we don't have to worry about yeah.
There's different, so that is also sort of a tool, not to make one better than the other. I mean,
Yeah.
I think if you look out at the world right now, there's an argument for why force isn't a great thing, but there's another side of that. It gives you the contrast to see what happens if I just sit here and I see what comes to me, and that's hard for us to do
It's
because
really hard.
the first things that tend to come up are uncomfortable things, relationship things, missed opportunities, responsibilities that are burdening you, things like that. Those are difficult to get through, but you eventually get to the good stuff where you connect with something. And I think people talk about it in I hate to use the term woo woo terms or whatnot, but like your inner child is really what you're doing is you connect with a part of yourself that has been there since you were a child, was sort of that energetic. And it was true for me in a lot of ways of what does that look like? What does it feel like when that person you allow that person to sort of, you know, be in the room with you?
So let's go back to your you brought yourself up, and then you said about 38 is when this
Yeah.
started happening for you. Did you stay in the job that you had been in or the career?
Um, Yeah, but what I had done is I really I basically I had a marriage that ended because I just honestly, I was terrified of who I would be without my career. I just was like,
Mm.
"I'm not worth anything." And, as much as I'd like to admit that I just, "Oh, I fixed that, Priya," that's sort of that's something that I have to continually address within myself is that there's this equation that is really deep down in there that it's about, your worth equals production. And I see that in the clients I work with. I see that in in myself still. And I just remember thinking, wow, if my wife at the time was saying, you have to choose me, this relationship or your work. And I remember looking at her being like, how can you ask me to make that decision? Like, there'll be no me then. And I just, hearing myself say that now, it makes you feel sad for the situation. But I think that there's a lot of people though that there's just, whether it's work or something, a lot of times it's work. We just we don't know who we are without that. And that's usually a sign that there's something that needs to be addressed there. Now, what I found was I wanted, I did eventually come into the coaching world and help people try to work on this internal negotiation, which is essentially that language helped me identify what was there and be like, there's a negotiation happening right now. And first of all, in leadership, people feel that. It kind of doesn't allow them to fully trust you. You're sort of unpredictable. And they're unclear on what the job is because they can sense that in you. They can't even verbalize it, perhaps, but
Yeah.
that happened in my relationship, and so I had to address that head on, and it wasn't something that I wanted to do. It was something that I would rather have spent energy avoiding.
Absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that. I had a conversation with a couple of men recently, and both of them were talking about the pressure, just being male, being that primary person, or maybe that this role that was given to them from early on, that you're the man, this is how you have to do it, and that pressure was so much that then just everything kind of crumbled, and it was really hard to let go of the role, because without it, who are they gonna be?
Yeah,
And then it was, almost like that that everything in their life was tied to that role,
yeah,
and meanwhile, like I said, everything was crumbling on the outside. So I appreciate you bringing voice to it. You're actually unmuting for a lot of people here, I feel,
yeah.
just with this conversation.
I
Yeah.
think yeah, and that's part of it too, is I think this is a pretty common experience. I mean, that's why the term, like, midlife crisis comes about, and that almost makes it sound comical or cliched or something, but there certainly was and is a period where, I had to sort of let my life collapse and sort of look at the pieces. I mean, I remember feeling like this. I was like, "Okay, you've got nothing. You've got no one. What are you going to do? How are you gonna rebuild this?" And I was very thoughtful about how I did it, and I'm still doing it. I don't wanna hint that it's something, but I think, yeah, there is that pressure, I think, for men, and I think that, I hate to talk about one group or another, but there is something unique there, and it's showing up in our culture in a lot of different ways. So I think it's important that, uh, I think step 1 is we do unmute and have that just have a space to think about this and have the conversation about your own unique experience.
Right, yeah. Let's talk about the work that you're doing and the clients that you work with. Who do you work with?
So, and this is another funny thing. I worked with my friend at a marketing agency, and we looked at who I was working with, and I was sort of attracting people who were leaders. They were vice presidents, regional managers, a couple of CEOs actually here and there. And I was on my podcast, I was speaking to these people, and, I really, I didn't work my way quite up that far the corporate ladder, but I find that there is something useful about, managing that again, that agreement with yourself, how it changes over time and how you show up as a leader. And when we didn't coin the term, I don't wanna say that, but when we came across the language of resolving the internal tension or resolving the internal negotiation, I was like, that's it. It even feels like what it is. Are they going to think I'm being authoritarian over this? Are they going to think that I'm a jerk? Are they going to think I'm being too soft with this? And just instead leading from a calm authority, kind of really knowing and being connected with yourself is something I think the best leaders sort of naturally have that, but I think leadership is something that's learned. It's not necessarily something that people are born with, and so a lot of the a lot of the leadership issues we have are uh, leaders will get stuck with that sort of that tension inside, and sometimes they just get stuck behind it and they can't move forward.
Yeah, I love that you talk about the internal negotiation because as you're saying that, I'm seeing yeah, it's these opposing forces that are, like, battling with each other, and then it's affecting how you show up. I run a nonprofit, I founded a nonprofit, and so we've been in business for 10 years, 10 years, and it took this year to realize I'm the leader, even though I was director, and so I had, these mentors working with me, and they were like, "Priya, they're looking up to you," and I'm like and I just couldn't believe that, like, after 10 years, even though I had founded it, that I was the leader, and that was this negotiation and all these little, um not little, pretty where you brought up you're bringing up so many important parts of this inner child that I wanted people to like me. There's the people pleasing who was fighting with the leader, who's fighting with the, "This still needs to be a business," and so I love that you bring that up.
Yeah, it is, and it makes something that I didn't at least have words for before, it makes it tangible instead of it being like because I thought, are you really worried about what people are thinking of you?" It was is this a self-esteem issue? Or, in another thing, it's like I didn't want my boss to think I was, a hothead if I was mad. They're all sort of one of the same of this internal negotiation. It could look either way. And so, it just there's another way to do it, and that is be very clear on what you value. It's funny. I used to do this thing where I first got my first leadership position, um, and I would go in early and I would calculate how long I could live on, pensions and things like that if I got fired that day. I did that for like 2 years straight. And I'm like, why would I live like that? But I was so worried about being found out, that I was like, my boss's boss is gonna come in here and say, "You don't know what you're doing, you're out of here." And that never happened. But what I can guarantee happened is that my team needed leadership, right? Whether they personally needed it or just, to fulfill my role in the structure of the company. And instead, they got someone who was not being clear because they had this negotiation going on, right?
Yep.
And so I had to ask myself this far later than I'd like to admit, what happens if I just let that go and I did what I thought was right? And I stood by what I thought was right, whether, it earned me a promotion or, a pass to go find another company to work for. And that is, if you can really deeply experience that, I mean, I think for most of us, if we align it with our values, it's going to be the thing that really moves you forward in your career towards what
Right.
the gift that you really have to give.
And it seems like it's quite liberating if you're not
Mhm.
battling with that, if you could just
Yeah.
really trust yourself. What happened as a result of you trusting that within yourself and saying,
Oh, well, I think number one, and it's funny to because I when you ask that, I'm like, oh, I need to give a result. But really, the most important thing to me was that I developed other leaders.
"Yeah,
That was the rewarding thing. For the company I work for, it was a very large company. There's over 150,000 sort of frontline employees, and me as the leader of my division, I had for 4 years in a row, I had the employee of the year for the whole company. And so that's like a badge of honor for me. And it wasn't my award. Yeah, I got to go on stage at a ceremony and take pictures with him and things like that. But the thing that happened when I started unbuttoning that was I was able to stand with people and create the space for them to flourish, right? And so, that's what's most meaningful to me, and then from that idea, I thought, well, I really wanna help people do that in a one-on-one space, and I had found coaching and things like that, and So I think it really I just realized the importance of, and science will back this up. If you want like long-term happiness,
Yeah.
there's one surefire way, and it's altruism. And the reason we don't do it is there's sort of an investment up front. It might be uncomfortable to sort of put yourself on the back burner, but if you pour yourself in others, that's really, that's where you will actually have joy and fulfillment in the long run.
Oh, what a great message. What a great message. So when clients come to you, when these leaders come to you, what is the number one thing that I mean, you can't narrow it down to one thing, but is there a common thread that they're coming to you for or that they're needing support with?
Yeah, so I would say that the first thing is usually it is they might come to me with something like I need to leave this job, or um, I need to leave my job and I don't like to interview, or I need to find another company. And there's that identity piece that's in there, but underneath that, what it really is the ask underneath that is I have lost, the agreement is no longer I'm no longer aligned with my agreement that I have with myself, and I can't find myself in here to really figure out what it is. And so it's actually very practical work.
Right.
ICF fashion coaching is very much about partnering with somebody and just kind of, you don't direct them, you don't advise them, you're just use curiosity as sort of the light in the dark, and you head towards that, right? And it's strange because sometimes it seems like, wow, that was a really big, piece of awareness they got. And then sometimes it was like, oh, well, that's obvious. And they're like, my mind is blown right now. Know that I could do that. One person comes to mind, and this particular woman had really sacrificed all social life, all relationships to work her way up the corporate whatever channel. And she just thought, I wanna have a relationship, and, I don't think I can. I don't think that I just don't think I value it enough, and I don't trust myself to do it. And she's like, "That's the thing showing up for me," and so, um, the funny thing was is that she just that once she was able to just be like, "Wow, I have to trust myself to do this," what opened up for her was not only the possibility of relationships, but friendships, and, interestingly enough, it she ended up getting a new job, that was still an executive job. It wasn't quite a CEO, but it really had to do with her self-knowledge
Yeah.
and what she could open up about herself. And when you open one door, it might have mostly to do with relationships, but when it's been closed off for so long and you're disconnected from that, it changes the whole room, the whole picture.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you said that. You're talking about relationships because as I started this journey, mine started about 7 years and at 7 years ago of just burnout. Um, you couldn't separate the different areas of life. It wasn't just, okay, work. I had to look at relationships. I had to look at my spirituality. I had to, even what you were talking about, altruism, like, how am I contributing? And I wasn't. Like, I was, but I wasn't. It was like, there was always, some expectation. So, looking at all the different areas in your life because it's gonna have a ripple effect, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't isolate itself to just one area.
Yeah, it doesn't because, it's all about really what it's about is it's about the experience of being with yourself, right? Instead, we spend so much time trying to, make ourselves malleable and fit ourselves into this mold. And like I said, when you use space instead and you see what's there, you realize that's not often a useful tool. It's like, wow, you might be better served by actually, not fitting the mold as clearly. And it has an impact on those because everybody's sort of going through this in their own way. And so you can really, I think that's where leadership begins when you start really with the self trust. So I have a podcast that I started with this question, Priya. I was like, what is success? Like, I thought it was these things. And I was like, I'm just going to talk to leaders about this. And it's funny, I thought that I would find like a good investment strategy and maybe, some tips on entrepreneurial. And what I found was that people who are really successful have a very, very, very deep sense of self trust. And if you're successful and you haven't developed that sense of self trust, something is missing. And so you're not gonna the fulfillment aspect of it, you might be a president of some company or something,
Yeah.
but if you don't have that trust in what you're doing, like I talk about this all the time. I probably mentioned on every episode of my podcast. There was this gentleman talking about the power of his mother raising him. He's like, my mom used to tell me, I believe this, that you have to believe in something so deeply that the world bends around you. And and he just said it like in passing. I was like, wait, what? And then I looked at what he actually did. He was looking for investors for his company, and he got 1,000 meetings and 1,000 no's until somebody said yes and invested in the company, and it became a huge phenomenon. It
Wow.
wasn't US, but he's like, I had to bide my time because I was waiting for it. And that's self-trust. Like if you never stop believing, then I mean, that's really the point, honestly.
Yeah, that what a great message. If I'm listening to that, and it's like he never gave up, and I think so many of us, including myself, will try it one time and it didn't work out, and then you're just like, "Okay, it didn't work." Meanwhile, we've got 999 more trials to go. This is a great example.
Yeah.
How do you let's talk about your business and who you have you already shared who you work with. How in what capacity do you work with people? How can people start actually working with you?
So, my website's ryanwattscoaching.com. And really, I always say this. It's like, schedule a conversation with me. We'll talk about it, if we decide to work together, a yes is as useful as a no.
Yeah.
The conversation is important to have because I think a lot of people, I'll talk to people and they're like, I love personal development. I'm like, oh, great. Yep. What are you? And they're like, well, I read this book. And listen, I've read every book out there too, but I'm like, what coaching really, you put it in action, you know what I mean? Because remove all the sort of barriers. And instead of it being forced, you kind of feel pulled towards where you want to go. That's what happens when you don't have that
Right.
negotiation. So I work one-on-one with people, and because it really is about discovering that what's blocking this connection with yourself. It's sort of excavating, and so that requires a unique relationship, and, I certainly couldn't work with everybody. There's a certain compatibility that needs to happen, but, and it has to be a level of trust and whatnot, but it starts with a conversation. So if you go to ryanwattscoaching.com, there's a button on the page to, schedule a conversation, and I would invite people to do so.
Amazing. Well, make sure to put those links in the show notes. And you did mention your podcast. So
Yeah.
uh, if you can share the title of that, where we can find that podcast.
Yeah, it's called the Personal Success Podcast, and, we really just talk about who these people are being in the world that they're successful, and everything from CEOs to, women who have started schools to entrepreneurs to authors, and these folks, again, the common thread is they have this very, very deep-seated self-trust. It's called the Personal Success Podcast. You can find it at thepersonalsuccesspodcast.com.
Amazing. Well, and is it on Apple and Spotify as well?
It's everywhere, yeah.
Everywhere. Okay, amazing. We'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes. Thank you for sharing your perspective. I think what you're doing is amazing work. Thank you for your honesty and vulnerability and sharing your own story as well. In closing, let's just have a little fun. Coffee
Yeah,
or tea?
coffee,
Morning person or night owl?
morning.
What's one book that's had a lasting impact on you?
Oh, man. Okay, you have to be authentic here. It's a sci-fi book called Hyperion.
Hyperion?
Yes.
Okay. What's something people would be surprised to learn about you?
I it's almost like I had another life. I was in a rock band for 15 years when I was a teenager into my
No
20s.
way. Okay,
Yeah,
I was like, what was the name of the band?
we were called Spare Change.
Love it. Everybody's gonna go to Google. We're gonna look that band
Yeah,
up.
there's some
If
interesting
you
videos that people have taken for years.
if you could leave listeners with one sentence to remember, what would that be?
I think really, I heard somebody say that, we're human beings are designed for connection. And I was like, "Oh, I like the sound of that." And the more I I delved into that, I almost felt like people human beings aren't designed for connection. They don't work right without connection. And so I think what I've found is, I have very important relationships in my life coaching is sort of a modern way. It's its own relationship category, like that, where you can have that connection, right? And really, um, I think it really is. It just makes life much richer.
Yeah.
I think I'd stop there.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan, for being my guest today. This has been an absolutely amazing conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel the same way, Pia. Thank you.
And this show was brought to you by Project Icon.